it up. Thank you. The devil is said to lurk between the rows of corn, inside the roots of the elder tree, and throughout the haunted wilderness. There are plants that bear his name. In this class, we will explore the devil's acre, the plot of land set aside for the old one, how you can create your own at home, and the benefits to maintaining this space. I will also discuss some of the plants of the devil's garden, those named for Old Nick or said to contain his spirit. These are plants like devil's eye, devil's bit, and devil's walking stick, and they all have a unique story to tell. So considering the devil's garden as a category of plants that share this quality in common, it shows us how we can rework these adversarial qualities into exercises of personal power. So the devil is a Promethean spirit, a bringer of knowledge and illumination. In the biblical story, he was too proud to submit and to kind of belittle himself to the humans, sort of knowing his own worth and deciding to strike out on his own. Thus we have the fall and all of the angels and spirits that decided to go along with him. So he shares a lot in common with the spirit of Lilith as well, which is kind of the feminine counterpart to the devil, being the unsubmitting, the unsubmitting, undominable female force. So why the devil? This is not the red cape wearing devil of cartoons, nor is it the Satan of the Old Testament. This is a different devil, the green devil, the devil of folklore. Reading a quote from Corinne Boyer, who wrote the book Plants of the Devil, which is one of the reading recommendations for this class. The association between certain plants and the devil therefore formed a natural linkage, one that has served to perpetuate the forbidding and wicked plant lore to a deeper degree over time. So this is something that has kind of grown and developed with us, through our relationship with this adversarial spirit, a relationship with the natural world, that this image and idea of the devil has kind of changed. And when we look at some of the different qualities of these spirits, we can see why. Being the first example that they're trickster spirits. So tricksters are known for playing both sides. They are often ambivalent, so neither good nor bad. They are shapeshifters, so they can take on a number of different forms, different perspectives, and they generally share knowledge via sacrifice, transformation. We see this in the myth of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods of Olympus and bringing it to mankind. We see a similar myth in northern traditions with Loki. So in all of these cases, these Promethean gods, these trickster spirits, were giving some kind of knowledge to humans, whether it was fire, knowledge of themselves. In some cases, we even see like knowledge of blacksmithing and cosmetics that different fallen angels and other kind of Luciferian spirits have brought to mankind. And in all of these myths, these particular spirits have been punished. They've been demonized and they have been treated as though they are evil because of their trickster nature and kind of going against the status quo. So these are spirits that have allied themselves with humanity to share knowledge at their own risk. So these are not, necessarily evil spirits, or, even violent towards humankind or anything like that. They've gotten this bad reputation because of sort of going against the status quo and sharing some things with us that they were not supposed to. So these are often familiar spirits. They exist in many different cultures. And then we look at another sort of stream of myths that feed into the idea of the devil and the horned god and this old ancient nature spirit through figures like Pan, Dionysius, Baphomet, kind of the horned god in general, Cernunnos, all of these different spirits kind of depicted with horns. And they were nature spirits, woodland spirits. So think fauns, satyrs, sylvan spirits, and green men. So you've all probably seen the green men images that have the face, and it's all green and leafy, and they have all kinds of different designs, and generally on old medieval buildings and things like that. So those were representations of that wild, untamable spirit of nature, and they were used to protect. The devil is the adversarial spirit. So we come up with this frequently when working with plants and working with nature, and especially studying poisonous plants, invasive herbs, and any kind of plant that has like a little bit of a bad rap to it. So they represent the part of nature that humans are not able to tame, the part of nature that is a threat to our existence, to our civilization, anything that we're not able to domesticate or grow commercially, or to control the growing patterns of, kind of gets this adversarial role put onto it. And we'll see with numerous different plants like this that have caused issues for farmers in agriculture over the years, that they're often associated with the devil as well. So farmers have had a very intimate and long relationship with this adversarial spirit, or this devil, which we'll see more in the next example. So the adversarial spirit challenges us and our conceptions of reality, magical practice, and spirit work. So these are Saturnian spirits. Think the Saturnalia, where everything is kind of opposite day. So roles are reversed, perspectives are changed. And this can kind of feel like a little bit of a violation at times, or that things aren't right, as we're kind of pushing some of those boundaries and breaking through some of our conceptions. So these are spirits that challenge us. And sacrifices must be made to work with these spirits intimately. So these are not easy spirits to work with or to communicate with. They don't really have respect for humans, because of the way that we've sort of treated the natural world for as long as we have. And in sort of their role as adversaries, they're not meant to be really gracious and placable and easy to kind of get to do what you want them to do. So in order to enter into a pact or an agreement with spirits like this, some type of a sacrifice must be made. And this is generally something that is symbolic, or more of a spiritual or energetic sacrifice, or being willing to let go of something that is very, very important to you, or something that may even seem that is very important to you, but is maybe kind of a crutch or holding you back. And we see that theme in the Devil Tarot card, in that the people seem to be chained and bound to the devil, but in actuality, they are sort of chains of their own making. And if they had the awareness, they would be able to easily slip out of the chains that they are in. So the devil, the adversarial spirit, teaches us or shows us that we're able to break through those chains on our own. So given offerings out of respect for the wild, giving back control to nature. So this wouldn't be so much as a sacrifice, but just more of an offering that's made on a regular basis to connect with this spirit, to honor it, and to start giving back to the land out of respect for the very nature of wild. So kind of giving back control to nature. Sacrifices have been made to the land for hundreds and hundreds of years. And we actually see this as a recurring theme in folklore throughout farmer communities, that shares of the crops, so different grains, oats, barleys, whatever it was that was being grown, a portion of that was often offered to the devil or to the old one, to this land spirit, to ensure that the rest of the crop wasn't spoiled. So things like disease, plague, pestilence, hailstorms, anything like that that could destroy the crops would be a sign that the devil was not happy, and that those crops were being taken back. So it was a common practice to make offerings to these spirits. In our next example, Cain, the first farmer. So this is a figure that's really important in the traditional witchcraft circles, very closely linked to the devil and to the idea of sort of this spiritual witchcraft lineage that can kind of be traced back to this figure. So Cain, this is the Cain from the Old Testament story of Cain and Abel. So I think sons of Abraham, perhaps. Maybe it was Isaac. That's not really important. But he murdered his brother. He murdered his brother because they both gave sacrifices to the God of Abraham. His brother Abel slaughtered sheep, bulls, rams, all the bovine creatures. So it was a blood offering, a blood and fire offering. And Cain, who was a farmer, offered his crops, which was kind of the older way of offering to the gods, burning different plant materials, crops, and pharmacon and things like that. So this sort of shows a transition from this earlier sort of agricultural period into this more sort of bloodthirsty, patriarchal war god that wanted to colonize the entire world. So Cain was cursed by the bloodthirsty god, who refused his green sacrifice. So Cain was forever marked. This became known as the mark of Cain, which was associated with witchcraft as well as vampirism. So looking at the vampire mythology, Cain would be considered sort of the first vampire. And when we get into the earliest stages of the vampire witch mythos, they often will kind of weave together into some of the same origins. So Cain is another figure that we can work with separately from the devil, but is definitely connected there as sort of that adversarial spirit of nature, the wild, the green, patron of the green practice. Interestingly, a lot of plants that have purple markings or spots, Conium maculatum or poison hemlock, for example, those purple spots or splotching are known as the mark of Cain. So different that have those markings kind of have that extra association there with him because of that. So the devil represents power. It's the power of nature, the power of individuality, the power of self-realization, the power of gnosis. So the devil represents that power. Powerful plants include poisonous, invasive, difficult to kill, hedge plants, so plants that grow on boundaries. These would have been things like hawthorn, blackthorn, elder, that would have been planted along the edges of farmland to kind of act as a natural barrier for the livestock. They're still very, very common and existent in the UK, but these hedge plants, because they existed on a boundary, were often associated with the devil, as sort of a liminal spirit into the wild, into the unknown, on the other side of the hedge. So of course, thorns, which are hedge plants as well, and more. So any plants that represent the wild and untamable. So vines are another great example. Anything that grows really prolifically. And they are powers that resist human control and have been called demonic. So the farmers are actually responsible for many of the folk names that we have for plants. And those that have given them trouble in the field were often called devils, fill in the blank. So it represents the force of otherness that is the wild, and it is that force that we're trying to connect with, that otherness, that spirit that is not human. And we can tap into these powers for gnosis or knowledge. Some may call this Luciferian gnosis because of the themes and cosmology that we're working in. And it can offer healing through transformation and transmutation. And this is very typical for plants like this. The healing does occur through sort of a death process where the old needs to die before the new can take on its sort of final transformation. We can also tap into these powers for protection from oppression and manipulation. So whether this is by individuals in our lives or a larger sort of societal oppression, all of these forces, all of these spirits kind of tap into personal power and rebellion against these different societal constructs, especially patriarchal Christian constructs, because they are the antithesis of those things. So we reach out to those powers to kind of deconstruct, and through our own healing and our own transformation, allow some of these older ways of thinking to sort of fall into the past. Of course, connecting to the spirits of the land. So this is very much an old animistic tradition, predating any names of the devil or Lucifer or anything like that. When we really get into that wild horned god kind of spirit that is prior to any sort of human names relating to him. And finally, left-hand path herbalism, which again kind of taps into the individual gnosis or Luciferian gnosis, ideas of rebellion, and sort of the spiritual elevation through the individual. So not turning to really any outside source for that is a very Luciferian kind of practice. So the Devil's Acre. The Devil's Acre is traditionally a small plot of land that was left uncultivated to ensure good crops for the rest of the farm. So this could be recreated today using a small square of garden or the corner of your property, or any part of your yard that you would like to let grow wild. So whatever grows there belongs to the devil, and that little piece of land is the devil's domain. So plants there take on a special and different quality. So the idea there is kind of that you're giving this piece of land back to nature or back to that adversarial spirit, so that the rest of your plants and the rest of your land thrives and does well. So it's on an offering for protection and for blessing from those land spirits. So essentially, you're really leaving it wild. That's kind of the idea. But if you're wanting to create some type of an altar, you could create a stone cairn, which is basically just a pile of stones that are placed in a ritual way as offerings that eventually kind of create a little monument. So that could kind of be the marker, and then letting everything around that grow wild and kind of be taken back to nature. And then regular offerings are given to maintain the connection to the spirit. So this could be offerings like the traditional milk, honey, whiskey, alcohol, incense smoke, tobacco smoke, any of the typical offerings would be acceptable. And this can eventually become a place to connect with genius loci or land spirits in general, kind of acting as a liminal space to serve as a contact point for some of those other entities. And it can give access to the spirit world. So actually using the Devil's Acre as, again, a liminal space, but sort of a gateway or a portal to where you're able to, in spirit, access other parts of the spirit world, the dream world, the underworld, and sort of serving as a jump off point. And it can also be a place to collect plants for ritual. So that being said, the whole idea behind the Devil's Acre is that we're giving it back to the old one. We're giving it back to the land spirits and to nature. Because of its association with the devil, it does have kind of an otherworldliness connected to it, which as occult practitioners, we could sort of look at as additional power, additional energy that could be tapped into. However, collecting plants from this area must be paid for with a sacrifice. And the greater the gift, the greater the return. And hearkening back to the mythology about Cain and Abel, sacrifice does not mean it has to be blood or animals or anything like that, but something that has a great value to you, that is given to the old one, to the land spirits, in return for the herbs that you're collecting. And these could be incorporated into ritual to tap into some of that very primal power. So this would only be done under very important circumstances, because you're literally approaching the devil and asking for some of his plants and some of his help. So not something to be taken lightly, and kind of the whole idea is that you're maintaining that spot and giving it back to. But for collection, we just had Beltane or Walpurgisnacht, also known as Hexennacht or Witches' Night. And this is a night that the devil is known to be attending celebrations. So it's also an important time for collecting herbs for magic. So if we use what we know about deadly nightshade and the folklore behind collecting that, deadly nightshade is the devil's favorite plant. And the only time to safely be able to collect that without pissing him off was Walpurgisnacht or May Eve. So people would wait until then to go and collect the deadly nightshade berries and whatever. Applying that to the Devil's Acre and only collecting on nights when he's not going to be paying as close of an attention. So you're still able to access that power without, necessarily leaving as big of a sacrifice. But that's pretty trickstery, even for the devil. So just some bad ideas. I have another quote from Richard Folkard, Plant Lore, Legends, and Lyrics. And this is in regard to plants in the Devil's Garden. And if you've not read Plant Lore, Legends, and Lyrics by Richard Folkard, I highly recommend it. It's a excuse me, a compendium of plant lore from the 1800s. And it's, I don't know how long it was compiled over, but it kind of is one of the only sources that has a lot of the folkloric information prior to like the modern witchcraft, modern new age, neo-pagan kind of a movement where we started to kind of add all of our own correspondences and things to plants. Folker's book is really a kind of pure version of what the folklore was in Europe and North America sort of prior to that movement. It's a really great book. I highly recommend it. They do have reprints of it that are not expensive, but you can also find it on PDF. First editions are going to be cost prohibitive, but very beautiful. So speaking generally, trees, plants, and herbs of ill omen may be placed in the category of plants of the devil, and among them must be included such as have the reputation of being accursed, enchanted, unlucky, and sorrowful. Plants dedicated to Hecate, the Grecian goddess of hell, who presided over magic and enchantments, as well as those made by use of her daughter, Medea and Circe, in their sorceries were also satanic. The spells of wizards, magicians, witches, and others who were acquainted with the black art were all made in name with the devil. Thus, all herbs and plants employed by them became veritable herbs of the devil. Now we're going to look at a few plants of the devil's garden, plants that have been associated to him for one reason of another. And the first one is parsley. So this is one that we don't typically think of as being like a very sinister or baneful herb, because it is a food garnish. We have it on our plates with dinner at nice restaurants, and that's a tradition that goes all the way back to ancient Greece and Rome. Parsley was worn in garlands during games and banquets, and it was thought to promote appetite. So that is sort of the reasoning for why we have it on our plates. Also kind of to counteract some of the effects of overeating, over drinking, which was a big deal back in ancient Rome, to stuff yourself with as much food and drink as much as you possibly could, and then go to the vomitorium and throw it all up so you could do it again. But parsley was a remedy for that. It was also used as a funerary herb in the ancient world to decorate graves and to place on bodies. Its association with death is where it acquired an ominous significance. The saying "to be in need of parsley" was basically to be on the point of death. So it was not a good thing to be in need of parsley. It's very difficult to grow from seed, and the superstition behind that is because the devil takes his tithe of it. So the plant belongs to the devil. It is bad luck to transplant it. It's difficult to grow from seed. Transplanting it was thought to offend the spirits that lived in the parsley beds. So also moving parsley from an old home to a new home was very bad luck. So it does some interesting kind of diabolical associations with a rather innocuous plant that doesn't get a lot of magical attention. But I like to work with parsley to connect with the spirit of the green devil. And that is kind of the facet of the devil, the adversarial spirit, that is very much associated with the natural world, with wart cunning, with plant magic, and things like that. So using it as kind of a garland on the altar, more of an offertory kind of thing. And then it's also got that funerary association, so connecting with the dead. The next one is another innocuous nightshade, the tomato. And many of you are probably familiar with this one, Solanum lycopersicum. So tomatoes have not always been as popular as they are today. A couple hundred years ago, if people knew what ketchup was, they would probably run screaming. But they were feared in Europe for being poisonous. This was partly because they are a nightshade and they have characteristic similarities to other nightshades. And what we know about nightshades is that everything in the nightshade family is completely poisonous and dangerous and useless, and we should just stay away from it completely. So it was classified as a poisonous nightshade. We know that tomatoes are obviously not poisonous, but they do have higher amounts of solanine and other cardiac glycosides in the green plant material, which can give you a stomach ache if you eat too much of it. Potatoes were also feared in Europe because they were believed to be responsible for the death of an aristocratic family. So what was happening here, they were trying this new delicacy of these tomatoes, which are very, very acidic, and they were eating them off of pewter plates and pewter silverware. So the acids in the tomatoes were leaching the lead out of their dinnerware and poisoning them through lead poisoning. But that wasn't realized until much later. So that was blamed on the tomato, which is why they were so feared for so long. But seeds were brought to Europe from Central America by explorers. And the tomatoes been eaten by the Aztecs and other people throughout Central America as early as 700 AD. Interestingly, the tomato worms, which I'm sure you guys have probably seen these, you may have seen them on some of your nightshades as well, because they really, really like tomatoes and all nightshades in general. So tomato worms were terrifying to these Europeans that were growing tomatoes for the first time. So the tomato worms were actually believed to be poisonous, and it was they who were imparting their toxicity to the fruit. So we see an example here of a really, really old idea of animals transmitting toxicity to plants and plants transmitting toxicity to animals. Yeah, this is a very kind of common theme in that it was believed that serpents and scorpions and all of these venomous creatures actually got their toxicity and their venom from eating poisonous plants. And the plants got their venom directly from either the dead or the underworld. So it was sort of this transmission of this venomous nature. The tomato maintains its weirdness, and we see it in Hollywood in films like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. So saying a small prayer to the old one next time you are enjoying a spaghetti and marinara sauce. The next one we have is a really new favorite of mine that I've been able to work with much more closely being down in Florida, because it grows prolifically in this area. It is known as Rosary Pea. And if we see, the most striking feature there are the black and red seeds. This is a vining plant in the pea family. So it does grow on a vine, and it has leaves that are similar to other pea plants, and pretty flowers too, but the most striking characteristic are these red and black berries. So this symbolic connection of red and black is very interesting, where you have kind of that more fiery Mars aspect that we could connect to Tubal Cain, who is kind of the blacksmith that has a connection to the devil. It's kind of like 6 degrees from the devil. How many different ways can we connect everything? But kind of having that more fiery aspect that we see sometimes. And then the black is representative of more of that Saturnian kind of underworld, Hadean sort of an archetype there. So the seeds are toxic, but they have a really, really hard outer shell. So they are only going to be poisonous if they're crushed or chewed. They have a very, very potent toxin that's called abrin. And I did write that. And it disrupts the protein synthesis in cells. So this is one of the most dangerous plant toxins. So plant plant toxins that disrupt protein synthesis and cell metabolism and things like that are some of the most dangerous poisons, because there's not a lot you can really do to reverse those things. They're breaking you down at a very, very cellular level. Where with anticholinergic things like the nightshades, it's more of a palliative, just sort of get through the process. But with some of these other toxins, it is not quite as simple. But it has been used in traditional medicine in Asia and the Caribbean, as well as the southern US. And interestingly, it is the first plant to proliferate after forest fires. So this is an interesting topic to me, plants that seem to come in after humans have disrupted, or there's been a forest fire, or even like nuclear waste leaking out in different places, and we start to see these invasive plants come in and actually start to kind of repair the land and help with erosion and help to process some of the toxins and heavy metals and things out of the soil. So this is one of those plants. And that's very sure the devil, despite everything that humanity does to destroy the environment, there are still these plant allies that refuse to leave an area and will come back and protect it and keep the humans out long enough for it to kind of revitalize itself. So this is an herb of power and protection. We see that in the coloration, red and black being powers of protection and potency. And in Yoruba traditions, it is associated with Elegua or Legba, which is an intermediary spirit that is contacted at the beginning of all rituals, because he is seen as a gatekeeper, kind of controlling the doorways to the spirit world. So very, very much akin to kind of the role of the devil as sort of that intermediary to the spirit world. He's king of the underworld that rules the opening and closing of the gates and all that. So a very interesting spirit to work with. Pioneer plants, yes. That's the correct term. Yes, Scott mentioned pioneer plants. I was talking about the plants that kind of come in after the forest fires and after different things like that. And one last thing on the rosary peas is I like to use them as offerings to spirits. And I typically collect mine from the graveyard, at which there's a cemetery nearby my house that I found rosary pea growing at. So I like to collect it from there. And any kind of vining herb is going to relate to kind of transmission of information and energy and synthesis of energy and new realizations and things like that, almost in the same realm of considering like the ayahuasca vine or any of those vines that sort of represent that double helix, or that in a way is kind of like a world tree. Even though it's not a tree, it's a vine, but it still has that characteristic of connecting the different worlds. The next one we have is wormwood. I have a quote from Ovid. "Until barren ground the loathsome wormwood yields, and well 'tis known how through its root bitter becomes the fields." So wormwood is known for being one of the most bitter plants that we have. It can be taken as a digestive tonic, also used to counteract the effects of overindulging in food and alcohol, in which it was used in the ancient world. So bitters, they soothe our digestive system. So it's really good to have digestive bitters after you've had a heavy meal, because it starts to really kind of get all the juices moving and helps with the digestion and things like that. So wormwood is so bitter that it was believed to actually make the ground bitter. And we often see this term bitter kind of being used almost synonymously with poison or toxins. Bitterness being something that, when the water becomes bitter, it becomes undrinkable or unpotable. So kind of a loose correlation there between toxicity, bitter herbs, and sort of the action of their energy. Wormwood is really, really good for banishing, getting rid of things. It is a vermifuge. It's been used to repel insects and other critters. It's used in medieval ink recipes, which renders the manuscripts undesirable to all of the little creatures that will nibble at the paper. So they used to use wormwood in ink. I actually use wormwood in my nightshade ink as well, kind of tying in some of the more fiery qualities of wormwood with some more of the Saturnian qualities of the nightshades. Gerard says that it's a good antidote for the poison of toadstools, and that's when it's taken with vinegar. And it can also be taken with wine to counteract the poison of hemlock, the shrew mouse, and the sea dragon. So if we get stung by any sea dragons or shrew mice, to go for the wormwood. But this is an interesting concept in that it was thought to be an antidote because of its bitter properties. Don't know how much truth there actually is into it, being used to counteract the poison of hemlock. This maybe is like a purgative, but that would have to be done, I would think, pretty quickly. So I think that might be not true, but interesting nonetheless. I find antidotes just as interesting as poisons because it is kind of a two-way street. So where there is poison, there's power. Where there is antidote, there is also power because we're tapping into that same kind of concept. So spiritually, it can be used to remove infestations and other energetic parasites. And in Hecatean witchcraft, offerings to the goddess were said to be wreathed in wormwood garlands. The next one we have is another one that grows here in Florida. It's established itself in Florida, but it's actually native to Madagascar. It's called devil's backbone. It's also called Mother of Thousands, and that's because of the way that it proliferates. So this is a really good example of a plant that is called invasive, that grows really, really prolifically, that has that association with the devil. Because it's named Mother of Thousands, I also connect it with Lilith as the mother of legions of demons. In the old myths, so we're able to connect to that energy as well. It is a succulent, cultivated as an ornamental, and it's interesting how it produces. So the above ground roots can actually send up like new shoots, so brand new plants from the rhizomes. There are 16,000 seeds per fruit. And if we look, each one of those flowers is going to fruit. So that's many hundreds of thousands of seeds. And then also, if we look at the leaves, those little plantlets on the edges of all of the leaves will eventually fall off. And then those can also become new plants. So there is no way that this plant is not growing if it wants to grow. It is thought to be toxic to cats and dogs, and it does have some medicinal uses, including oral health, anti-cancer properties, and ulcers. So this is an example of one that doesn't have a whole lot of magical lore associated to it. Most definitely not in North America or Europe, but by looking at some of its growing habits and qualities and making some symbolic associations, we can work with this plant for things like resilience, rebirth, and continuation in the face of adversity. Next one. This is also a new favorite. Oh, and did I not put a picture of it? Oh, I left a blank slide for a picture of it. So Devil's Walking Stick. This is also called Devil's Club. There is a Devil's Club that grows on the western United States. That is a very important medicinal herb to the indigenous peoples on that side of the country. There is another on this side, the Devil's Walking Stick, Aralia spinosa. Doesn't have quite as many ethnobotanical uses as the Devil's Club, but it was used by Civil War doctors as a folk remedy, an antiseptic treatment of drug-resistant bacterial infections. So this plant, the bark and decoction, was fighting off some of the most drug-resistant bacteria that, even modern, penicillin, things like that have a hard time with. But this is something that they were using in Civil War to prevent some of those infections, with so many battle injuries and amputations and things like that. And this is a really interesting looking plant. So it's basically a little shrub. All of the stems are very twiggy, covered in thorns, and it gets very juicy black fruit. It is deer resistant, and this particular variety is native to North America. It's mildly toxic, which is contained in the seeds of the berries. And it is a member of the ginseng family, so it's used medicinally in similar ways to break fevers, and that's through perspiration, so it's going to have kind of that warming quality that we see with ginseng, and also act as an emetic and purgative. This is another example of a plant that often grows in disrupted areas. There is not really any magical or folkloric use that I can find with this plant, but I've kind of made my own association in that it is kind of a hedge plant, in that it will grow in thickets, sometimes similar to blackthorn and hawthorn. So I'm calling this the North American blasting rod. So if you're familiar with the blackthorn blasting rod or shillelagh, which is a blackthorn wand that is used specifically for cursing, I am of the opinion that this could be used very similarly. It would just be difficult to hold it because it's so thorny. Interestingly, though, it was grown in Victorian gardens as a grotesque ornamental. So the Victorians were really cool. They were all obsessed with everything weird and gross and dark and death, and they had ornamental gardens that were full of all of these plants that were grotesque or sinister or strange, as sort of a novelty or curiosity. So they had an appreciation for a lot of these plants that we are talking about. Oops. So that was the end of the presentation, but I have just a little bit more to read and talk about, talking about the Devil's Due. So this is sort of similar along the lines of something that a farmer would do in offering portions of his crops and his produce to the Old One. We can also do that in our magical practices and our workings, honoring the wild and untamable qualities of nature and ourselves, reminding ourselves that all does not belong to us, and observing the sovereignty of the land, giving to the spirits of the wild their due respect. So And this can be done to call upon the devil for protection, personal agency, sovereignty, rebellion, general occult pursuits, and pact making. So if you're not doing the devil's acre, you could do this technique, or you could do them both. But essentially with the devil's due, all you're doing is collecting an offering from every working that you do. So every formula that you make, every incense that you burn, some people will even save their ashes or have like a special cauldron that they're putting all of their sort of ritual, not waste, ritual byproduct. So whatever is left after the fact, kind of putting it in a cauldron or container and setting it aside for the devil. This could also be plucking a leaf or flower from every plant in the garden, or putting a drop of every potion or tincture or formula into a separate bottle. And then that would be deposited into either the devil's acre or a wild place out in nature, away from the home, away from civilization, as sort of a way to offering and to give back, and kind of take a little piece of all of the different things that you do and just sort of show that that recognition and respect to those old powers. So that concludes our presentation. And I really appreciate you guys for showing up to the live. I'm sorry it's been so crazy. I know I got the link wrong, and then the speaker issue and all of that. So I'm taking my computer in to get this sorted out. Let me see. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. I will get the PDF of the notes and the PowerPoint presentation uploaded to the Patreon if it's not already there. Yeah, but with that, thank you all for attending, and I'm going to finish up my in-person.